So the board examination material and methodology has changed. AQA are now going to be offering all of poetry through the literature section solely, whereas the language section will now be devoid of poetry and just concentrate on your reading and writing skills. So all the poetry that you're going to do will just be on literature. So what we're going to look at here is how to go about answering the new style paper. That's obviously going to be relevant to all students sitting any English exam with AQA on literature after November, because November is going to be the last of the retakes for the old syllabus. If you are doing that one, then please look at one of the older videos, whereas this one's going to be just for those doing the quote-unquote new GCSE. So first off, the exam is going to be two sections. There's a section A where you compare known poems from the anthology, and section B where you analyse an unseen poem. Now, the first and most important thing we have to look at is the mark scheme that you're assessed on in English. We're going to ignore AO4, which is down here, because it's not actually going to be assessed at all. So AO1, respond to text critically and imaginatively, select and evaluate textual detail to illustrate and support interpretations, which basically means pick out good points. AO2, explain how language, structure and form contribute to writer's presentation of ideas, themes and settings, which basically means how does what the writer has how does what the writer's written help to explain what he's trying to get across. AO3, make comparisons and links, etc., and then basically just say comparing and this basically means comparing and contrasting and making links between the two poems that you've actually chosen. So the weighting here, again, this is taken from the mark scheme, is you're looking at AO1 is basically you've got 10%, and in section A, and then another 5%, another 10%. So you notice that there's the comparison marks there. All of AO3 is the 10%, whereas section B, you just get 5 marks for each, and that's actually reflected in how much they're each worth. Section A is worth 36 marks, and section B is worth 18 marks. So it's obviously half of the marks that are actually there. So we'll look then for section A, and basically here we have the exact banding, and obviously if you just move away from the examiner's terminology and we'll just go down here, so basically all of these elements here are actually rewritten, just an easier way to hopefully understand. So for an A-star person, which is anywhere between the 33 and 36 marks, he or she picks out lots of information and develops the points well. And this is obviously their insight, so they really show a deep understanding of it. They analyze specific words and extend their meanings. So basically, you can take a word or take an idea and actually show how it can be referenced in multiple ways. Obviously, you're using PE to do that. You smile, which is structure, meaning, images, language, and effect. And you actually look at the language and the structure and how that actually supports their meaning, which is evaluating the writer's use of structure and language, etc. Original interpretation, so basically you can flip an idea or offer something new on an idea that's actually presented, and that's good to actually kind of extend with the effect on you. You can compare meanings and techniques used, shown by the writer, so for that you use all of smile. You pick out items from all through the poems and embed quotes efficiently and quickly. So basically you haven't just concentrated on one or two stanzas, you've actually picked things out from all the poems and obviously cross-reference them, etc. And your writing is of a high level, your vocabulary is obviously developed, you've got the right terminology being used, and your sentence structure and spelling are accurate. So we move on then to planning the response to section A. The key is obviously to compare and contrast. There are many ways of doing this dependent on your style and what you've been taught. So if you've been taught something with your teacher and it works for you, stick with that. If you are lost in how to actually go about this, then hopefully the second half of this video will be more useful to you. So we're going to look at two classic examples and obviously just give them a name so you know what it is you're doing. So first we're talking about build and compare, and B, we're looking at tennising. So for build and compare, obviously the structure here, or the idea here, is to build first, and for this we spend 20 minutes of the exam simply analysing the first poem. Whatever the one in the question is, you just write your heart out about that. You mention 2 or 3 things from smile across the way on all of it, and you just really analyse that first one. Don't think about the comparing and contrasting yet. That is your building section, okay? That's where you've actually built a strong response to the first poem, and that's kind of like your structure, your framework. That's what you're going to need, and of course it's going to be over several paragraphs, so just isolate everything you can from one poem. Now obviously, so in doing that, you've already started to hopefully in detail enough to actually do some of these criterion here, but obviously all the ones here that you also need marks from, you are yet to do. So we move on then. For the compare section, you then, so this is for the second, I'm calling it a section, it's not a paragraph. So basically when you finished writing about the first one, and that should take several paragraphs, maybe a page, maybe a page and a half, obviously depending on how much you can write, then you're going to start a sentence or paragraph with a comparing or contrasting phrase, and then you're going to pick out similar or different elements of smile depending on which poem you're asked about. So whatever you've written about in the build section, when you move on to the compare section, everything you write should be similarly in contrast. So basically there you're actually hitting all the exam criteria that they're actually asking you to do with the comparison, etc., and what you're picking out, etc., to compare and contrast. So obviously to do this, you're always going to be using terms like in addition, similarly, also, however, an alternative, another difference, etc., and again, pick out any elements of smile that you've talked about before and just show the comparison. So if you were to imagine this one visually, let's imagine that the poem A, the one that's in the question, is in red and poem B is blue. So A is the build and B is the compare. So here my essay will look a bit like this. Okay, so all of these first about the poem that's actually in the question, etc. Obviously that changes the color, that doesn't help. These are all red here, so basically that's me talking in detailed smile points about poem A. And then part B, which is here, my essay, again these are all paragraphs. This is going to be similarly, on the other hand, this poem also uses the idea such and such is also explored. Now naturally there'll be less to write about when comparing poem B as your linking points, whereas here you just got to write about anything you want, but obviously these ones, some of it's going to be similar, some of it's going to be different, and some of it's just going to be neither or, in terms of what how you're trying to answer the question. Now you've also got a green section down here. Now the green section at the bottom is for your chance to develop a brilliant flipping opportunity. So you take one or two things from the poem and give them a completely alternate meaning. So basically you're just going to try and go for something really original there, because what you're trying to hit from the criteria, if we go back up to the top, is an imaginative interpretation of ideas. That's you're really going to hit that there. So in the insightful exploratory text, you've hit it by hitting your PE points. Close analysis, obviously you're picking out the points. Evaluation of the writer's use of language, etc., because you're picking out smile. Convincing imaginative, that's your green part. Evaluate comparison, that's obviously with the structure that we've just gone through. And evaluative section of range of telling detail, again, that's more to do with the style, and obviously it references as well that what's there at the top. So there you've got, I know it looks rather lame, but that's basically how your essay should look, and that's just one way of doing it. Now after you've done, or when you're actually writing about the green section, remember to qualify it with something vague, like however, some would say, it could be seen, because if you say no, this definitely means this, then it looks like, and if you're wrong, then basically you might be out on a bit of a limb. So you want to make sure that you're putting it across in a way that means you've thought about it and you're just adding it as an added thought, not something to be taken as gospel. Now the second way of going across to analysing a poetry comparison response is via tennissing, which is again some things that some people do. It's another popular way, but it gets you no more or less marks. If I were to sit and do the examination reports again, examining again, I like seeing this because I knew exactly what I was getting. You got the one poem really well analysed, you got a feel for what the student was doing, and then here there was all the compare, contrast. This one might be slightly more sophisticated because it might be slightly more difficult to do, but obviously it's slightly more easy to get lost, and obviously the examiner's going to mark whatever you put and they're going to fully concentrate on what you're doing, so it's completely up to you, whichever you feel more comfortable with. But the basic difference here is that you're going to try and volley comparison points back and forth in each paragraph or in each with following sentences, almost like a tennis rally. So every time you pick something from poem A, you immediately mention a similarity or difference with poem B. So you're constantly just going back and forth, and then you swap between them, covering a range of smile back and forth through PE. And again, we have the green section. So that would look more like this. So poem A does this, simile does this. However, poem B does that, which is also similar to that. One of the differences, the difference, etc. So you just come to and from with all the smile points, depending on how you want to have it laid out. And again, you go for that original interpretation at the end, or you can try and stick it in there. The only reason I've actually said out of this is just to offer you two ways of going about it. Doesn't mean you have to do it this way at all. Again, each section represents paragraphs which may be focused in a linear fashion going through the poem. They may be focused on a smile element, or they may be focused on how an M is represented through the other elements of smile, the structure, image, language, and effect. So you have complete freedom in how you go about it. There's not a key thing that you have to talk about first, second, third. Obviously, you're going to answer the question first and foremost, but then after that, you can move through it, and the examiner is looking for, as mentioned again, insightful and exploratory. So you are allowed to kind of move around within the poems. Now, one thing you notice that AO4, which is AO4, which is relating it to social historical context, history, etc., and how this, you get no marks for that in this. So if you know that the poet had some kind of disease, or at the time he was trying to fight against the king, or whatever it was, it's irrelevant here. So just always try and focus on what the examiner is looking for, so you make it easier for the examiner to give you marks there. So we scroll down again and we look at section B, which is a lot easier, and this is brand new to AQA. And here you have to analyze a poem that you've probably, it's 99% sure you've not seen it before, but you never know. Here you have to analyze a poem you've never seen before, and this is worth half of the marks for section A. So obviously you're going to spend less time and you're going to write less for it. So however much you've written for that, don't expect this to be exactly the same. Now, I think this is going to be easier simply because you're just going to smile the hell out of this poem. So we'll look at the mark scheme as well. So this is the idea, the template that AQA have put up. So top marks, so again, the same thing, you pick out lots of info, analyze specific words, you smile, you offer an original interpretation, and you must use embedded quotations. So exactly the same skill. There's no real difference in what you're going to do. All you don't have to do now is you don't have to compare it to anything. So what I'd recommend is just smile the hell out of the poem, just till it crumbles, like Arsenal at the end of a season, or something else that kind of pathetically dwindles and isn't how it was anymore. Just each paragraph, when you're actually writing it, could focus on an element of smile, depending on the question, and then obviously depending on the wording of the question, you can do it a certain way. So if the question asks you to show how something is going about, then you might discuss the meaning and then show how the structure, image, language supports it. However, if the question asks you how the structure, language, or images are used by the writer, then you might want to then discuss obviously the one that's mentioned, and then show how this supports various meanings or demonstrates various meanings, and then in that you can say, and this is also supported by, etc., etc., etc. So that's just a brief rundown of how you'd go about answering the new poetry paper. Good luck.